primates.
Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico. Working on oil painting, as of yet unnamed. Kind of have a inkling of a direction that I want to go with it. So we have some bright yellow mixed up, some blue, phthalo blue, a little white, a little red, and a little yellow. Oh, I already said yellow. Magenta, I'm sorry. Magenta on the palette as well. So, here we go. Let's see where it goes.
Dominant alpha males. We are no different. We also, as we sit here this evening, operate under this kind of social organization. I mean, we complain about it, we analyze it, we are aware of it, but we live under it. It's how it is. So here is my suggestion, that what psilocybin did was it changed behavior. It interfered with primate behavior. Specifically, it interfered with this tendency to form monogamous pairs and dominance hierarchies. And so the ordinary tendency of the primates to organize themselves that way was interrupted, medicated out of existence, if you like, vaccinated against, if you like, by the presence of psilocybin in the diet. And this overemphasizing or chemical accentuation of sexuality occasioned by the arousal of the psilocybin was sufficient to dissolve the ordinary tendency toward monogamy and replace it with an orgiastic sexual style, or they coexisted simultaneously. I mean, who knows? We weren't there. It's sort of the way I imagine it is that at every new and full moon, there were group mushroom parties which basically simply got out of hand regularly. And so the monogamous pair bond would be under pressure, if not completely eliminated. Many cultures have this, even to this day. I mean, in a sense, Mardi Gras is a festival where the rules are dissolved, and nobody is supposed to go to their spouse the Monday after and say, you know, was that you I saw dressed as Marie Antoinette? And because, you know, the rules are, there is permission to break the rules, and many societies do this. The result of an orgiastic style like that is men cannot trace lines of male paternity. And so there's a tremendous social glue, a tremendous force for the cohesion of community. Men don't then think in terms of my children. They think in terms of our children, the children of the group. And under the aegis of this group, this polymorphic sexual style, group, child care, and extended family rearing, we produce everything that we think of as human, that we value. Our art, our music, our philosophy, our sense of each other's worth, body painting, tattooing, piercing, all the accoutrements that distinguish us from animal existence were put in place when we had a different kind of mind than we have now. We didn't have a mind that favored role specialization and male dominance and anxiety over female sexual activity related to feelings of male ownership. That all came later. We became human beings in this other world of values and psychological attitudes. Problem is that, as I say, the mushroom faded. But by the time it had faded, we were no longer the wordless symbiotes of camels, the barely sentient hunters of the African plain. By the time we were finished with the mushrooms, we had language. We had social institutions, but what we began to lose was, you can get as wet-eyed as you want about it, but respect for each other, a sense of each other's individuality, a sense of love, a sense of community. And it must have been, though it happened over a long period of time, very much like what we're living through now. A sense that people are, no damn good and getting worse. A sense that, why can't we be as we once were? Where is our sense of each other? Where is our ability to care for each other? So forth and so on. I wrote a book called Food of the Gods, in which I tell this story in the first third of the book that I've just told you. And then I show that what history is essentially is a careening, out of control effort to find our way back to this state of primordial balance. One of the things that marks us as humans that is unique is our obsessions with drugs, our ability to addict. We addict not only to substances, we addict to each other, we addict to ideologies, Marxism, Christianity, skinkism, that's practiced in Washington, whatever. And we addict to each other. I am a romantic with the best of them, but I can't help noticing that a broken heart and heroin withdrawal show very similar presentations. Really, insomnia, sweating, sense of diminished self-esteem, hysteria, it's very, very similar. So a psychologist looking at a person with an addictive syndrome will say, well, you were damaged in childhood. There is some trauma there that you're trying to compensate. You're trying to compensate. Well, I'm not that keen on all this psychologizing, but I do think that we could apply this model to ourselves on a grand scale. We were essentially torn from the Gaian womb, thrust into the birth canal of history, and expelled sometime around the fall of the Roman Empire into the cold, hard world of modern science, existentialism, and all the rest of it. And we have searched the planet for substances which would assuage our sense of pain. And there are things out there. Alcohol, the whole morphine family, so forth and so on. But these things always have consequences. There's a price to be paid. The very knowledge of psilocybin was lost to the entire planet, except for some tribes in the Mexican mountains, for several millennia, until Valentina and Gordon Wasson went in the early 1950s and found these mushrooms and brought them out, and then Albert Hoffman, who had earlier discovered LSD, synthesized the compound and made it available. That was 55. Well, by 66, all human research with these things had been forbidden. It's not that science mowed this field and moved on. It's that science has never really been here. We haven't looked at the implications of diet on early human evolution. We don't have a theory for the evolution of consciousness of any consequence, and yet, the factors I've laid out for you, increased visual acuity, an impact on sexual and social behaviors, triggering of glossolalia-like phenomena in the presence of a boundary-dissolving psychedelic experience. These are catalysts sufficiently dramatic that inculcated into a cultural style, I think they explain a great deal about where we came from and who we are. Now, the irony of all of this is that we live in a society that has made practically any discussion of this illegal. Certainly if I were to end this lecture by handing out doses of psilocybin, I would be gently taken by the elbow and led away forever. The Western mind is particularly phobic of this subject. I mean, we have bent our laws so that people can jump out of airplanes in the pursuit of thrills, so that they can bungee cord off major highway bridges and freeway overpasses. So concerned are we to fulfill society's need for thrills. But this is something else. It provokes all kinds of alarmed reactions, and perhaps you believe unfairly. I think that when you examine the situation, it's possible to understand very clearly why this is such a social issue. Because what these things do, if you look, and now I'm slightly broadening my raft to include other psychedelics besides psilocybin, but psilocybin is certainly true in all cases. What these things do, if you had to generalize 100,000 psychedelic experiences, the ones where people thought they were God, the ones where people had to be taken to the ER room and have their stomach pumped, and all of them, if you generalize, what these substances do is they dissolve boundaries. They dissolve boundaries. If you love it, you'll love it. If you hate it, you'll hate it. But that's what they do. They dissolve boundaries. Now, the reason this provokes a lot of social anxiety is because all societies are about the maintenance of boundaries. It doesn't matter whether you're, a stockbroker in New York, a Zen monk in Kyoto, a Hasid in Jerusalem. Your society is held together by boundaries and definitions. And anything which dissolves those boundaries and introduces relativity into cultural modeling is felt to be threatened, because we like to believe that our reality is somehow sanctioned, that this is how it should be. But in fact, that's just a cultural judgment. All cultures think that their culture represents a sanctioned reality. It doesn't. It just represents the current download of their linguistic enterprise. At the core of the Western anxiety about boundaries is something that we are very proud of, that we believe we invented. We call it the ego. Sometimes we call it the democratic individual. We say no Eastern society could have produced this. We took this from the Greeks, we perfected it through the Romans, we brought it up through the medieval period. John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and all those folks fixed it up for us in the 18th century. Thomas Jefferson ironed out the wrinkles, and modern America is the shining example of what you can do if you empower the ego, the citizen, the individual. We want nothing of tribalism, still less of collectivism, and God forbid, nothing whatsoever to do with communism. See, all these things set us going. But in fact, the ego is appropriate only to a certain point. I mean, yes, we need egos, so that when you take someone to dinner at a reasonable restaurant, you place food in your mouth, not their mouth. This is what the ego is for. It tells you who pays. But in fact, what the ego is the return to consciousness of this psychic structure related to the patterns of dominance. And the way I think of the ego is it's like a cyst or a calcareous growth or a tumor that gets going in the personality. And if not treated, it becomes chronic. And then there is no cure. There can only be, a certain amount of maintenance and medication of it. But it's incurable, except unless we resort to not only non-prescription drugs, but drugs currently illegal. In other words, the psychedelics, through this boundary dissolving function, dissolve that boundary as well. And so they promote a larger sense of the world than the values of capitalism, competitiveness, object fetishism, property acquisition, and the bottom line in power. So the issue, as was always since the 60s forward, I think, is not simply an issue of religious freedom or an issue of an eccentric minority social practice being tolerated by the majority, the way they tolerate handing out pamphlets in airports or something like that. The issue is, in fact, what kind of people shall we be? And then what kind of society shall we put in place? And that's why my theory of evolution is not simply a dry footnote on an issue that involves anthropologists, primatologists, and biologists, but it turns into a political issue because our unhappy, addicted, ego-driven condition has become not simply the source of our own unhappiness, that was bad enough, but now it's the source of great discomfort and dislocation for all life and human society on the planet. We are out of control. We are basically severely addicted to things and cannot stop ourselves. And we know, or we should know, that there is not enough petroleum, heavy metal, so forth and so on, in the planet to give all the thing addicts all the things that we know they must have in order to be happy. We have spread this intellectual virus from pole to pole, to Turkmenistan and Borneo, to the upper Amazon and to the Tajiks. Everybody wants kids, everybody wants the pause that refreshes. What are we going to do about this? Well, so far, we've been treating it like an endless garden party. There's no serious plan on the table to deal with this at all. I think that the momentum of human history is pushing us inexorably toward some kind of day of reckoning, and in which we are either going to have to turn consciously toward brutality and selfishness and say, well, let India go, let Bangladesh go, triage, costs too much, can't possibly fix the problem. In order to maintain our locked compounds and our 50 channels of television and the endless availability of arugula, we have to let India go. We're going to have to turn that way. In other words, each consciously participate in a choice to brutalize the human enterprise, or we're going to have to seriously talk about very major restructurings of our society. And I don't really know how we do that. I was living in Northern California a couple of years ago when they wanted to close an air base near here, and the newspapers were filled with for weeks with analysis of whether Western civilization could absorb this hammer blow at the very heart of its institutions of closing one friggin' air base, for crying out loud. That's not my idea of major change, you know? We may have to give up some of our pretty things. We may have to discipline some of the irresponsible social philosophies that run amok among us. And no, I don't mean the advocacy of psychedelic plants. I mean the Roman Catholic Church's position on population control in the Third World. And the Germans take quite a knock for the Holocaust, but the Catholic Church manages to push more people into death, disease, and degradation every year than the Holocaust managed in its entire show, and it's thought rather crass to even mention the fact. It seems to me, as long as these Catholic bishops can show their face in public, that we are in complicity with mass murder. It's not pleasant news, but what are you going to do about it? Islamic fundamentalism, another bunch of knotheads with an anti-human agenda. What are we going to do about this? Are we going to go gently into that good night of planetary chaos, extreme distortion of class structure, defense of what we have at any cost against those who have nothing? There doesn't seem to be any other plan on the horizon. Arthur Koestler, who probably never thought he would be quoted by Terence McKenna, a very conservative character. You'll recall he was a Marxist who turned on Marxism and led a very interesting intellectual life. He wrote a book 30 years ago called The Ghost in the Machine. And he made a case similar to mine, but a little simpler. He observed human beings are hardwired for homicide. This is what we do best because this was something we had to do, apparently, at some point in our past, at least in Kessler's view. He didn't believe in a mushroom paradise. But he reached the same conclusion that I have, which is we need a pharmacological intervention on antisocial behavior, or we are not going to get hold of our dilemma. And there have been dystopias based on drug intervention on aggressive behavior. You all remember Brave New World, where every time anybody raised their voice, they were given a gram of soma and told a gram is better than a damn. And so nobody ever had a thought.
All right, that's pretty fun. Got the lines hacked out. Now I think I'm going to do a little highlighting and a little filling of the negative space with the second take. So, second take.
Low awareness
Take two.
Lives in their little condominium apartments, just ladling this garbage into their minds. The average American watches 5.5 hours of TV a day, so imagine how much time these people watch. I mean, to think of that as human at all, if that were a drug, we'd be up in arms. You know, if people were loaded at home with that level of mental condition day after day after day, we would do something about it. So I can't propose a grand solution, but I do think that it is pregnant with implication that here at the end of the 20th century, with all of these problems hammering down on us, the news comes from the rainforests and the deserts that these Aboriginal people, while we made the descent into history and got the top quark and planted the flag on the moon and all that, they kept the faith. And they have a materia medica a toolbox that can carry us back into a connection with the planet. Now, the question might be asked, why do you have such overwhelming faith in what is, after all, a substance, a drug? I mean, don't psychedelics just cause you to see pretty pictures and patterns and tally up your gains and losses, and then you come down and that's it? And the answer is no. What is mysterious here, and I mentioned it in the early part of my talk, what is mysterious here is this thing we call the psychedelic experience. Those people nailed to the ground around the campfire 50,000 years ago, they didn't know what it was. And when we go in there, armed with our Heidegger and our Husserl and our Wittgenstein and our Merleau-Ponty, we don't know what it is either. There has been no progress in 60,000 years in reducing the psychedelic experience to a known quantity. It is as terrifying, as awesome, as ecstatic, as irreducible to us as it was to them. Well, what is that? As secular people, we rarely experience religious awe, especially of the uncontrollable sort. I believe that what makes the psychedelic experience so central is that it is a connection into a larger modality of organization on the planet, which is a fancy way of saying it connects you up to the mind of nature herself. The planet is not just a hodgepodge of competing species. That's the old evolutionary model. That's been obsolete for decades. The new evolutionary model is that where we see species, nature sees only a gene swarm, genes moving at various speeds, being transferred around, a large percentage of them by sexual propagation, but a large percentage of them by asexual and vegetative propagation, and still others by more exotic methods of propagation, such as go on in the fungi and the bacteria. The world is a gene swarm. And people like Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock have been suggesting for years that the Earth is a kind of thermostatic self-regulator. Well, if you carry that idea far enough, thermostatic self-regulator is a way of saying a kind of computational engine, a kind of computer, a kind of mind, a kind of mind. The Gaian mind. The reason those mushroom-eating, orgiastically behaving people worshipped a great horned goddess, the reason they imaged the numinous other as feminine, was because they had a connection into a kind of overarching intelligence that they instinctively and intuitively felt to be feminine. And we retain this in our languages as the idea of Mother Nature and the femininity of the land and so forth and so on. But it's just become a distant metaphor to us. I think our intelligence is a source of toxicity to nature and discomfort to ourselves unless our values are based on planetary values, are linked to the values of the rest of nature. And that means we need to fit ourselves more appropriately into the scheme of things by limiting our numbers, by limiting our extraction of natural resources and toxification of the environment. We need to realize that there is a hegemony of life on the planet, not necessarily a hegemony of intelligence. Intelligence is not a license to trample. The proper role of intelligence in a planetary ecology is that of gardener, caregiver, and maintainer of balance. Well, so where do we go, and what do psychedelics have to say about that? Well, I believe that psychedelics show us something which capitalist, consumer, fetish-oriented society doesn't want us to know. What psychedelics show us is the incredible richness of our minds. That you, little you, can produce more art in a 20-minute burst of hallucinatory intoxication than the Western mind has produced in the last 500 years. Our socially created space is incredibly impoverished. You know, we have Picasso's contribution and Pollock's contribution and everybody's contribution, but it altogether is as nothing compared to the richness that resides in each one of us a half inch behind your eyebrows. We are told, you know, oh well, if you want beauty, you have to own a Lexus. Or, you know, if you want a sense of satisfaction, then you need a triple-car garage. On and on. This is absolutely not true. These are substitute addictions that will never satisfy for the genuine article. And the genuine article is a connection into the Gaian mind. Well, I don't believe or expect for a moment that ever again, naked, tattooed, and joyous, we will herd our cattle across the grasslands of Africa. I mean, there are 6 million of us. That chance has been blown. But what can we do to ameliorate our situation? Well, I have always been an optimist. I'm more optimistic right now than I have been for a long time, because sometimes when you're an optimist simply on principle. You believe it's going to turn out all right, but you don't see how it possibly could. I'm beginning to see how it possibly could turn out all right. And my notion is, first of all, I follow in my thinking about shamanism, and I follow the great historian of religion, Mircea Eliade, who got it almost all right, except that he never embraced psychedelics. He thought they were decadent. But that was just his French European education, and he came too early. But anyway, Eliade wrote a book called Shamanism, and then he subtitled it, The Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. Now, he wrote the book in French. In French, technique has a connotation that it doesn't have in English. It means both a way to do things, and it means technology. Later, the French sociologist Jacques Ellul wrote a book called Propaganda, and the little banner under which his book flew, which is printed right on the frontispiece, is he says, there are no political solutions, only technological ones. The rest is propaganda. And then he spends 200 pages explaining what he means by political solutions, technological solutions, and propaganda. By Ellul's understanding, I agree. I think ideology is toxic. All ideology. It's not that there are good ones and bad ones. All ideology is toxic, because ideology is a kind of insult to the gift of human free thinking. I mean, if you adopt some ideology, Leninism, Mormonism, it doesn't matter, then you have all the answers. You just go and look in the catechism. Well, I don't know why they issued you a brain. They could have just given you the catechism. Technology as the counterpoint to ideology is a very different animal. Now, right now we're going through a technophobic phase because people think technology means exploding nuclear power plants and irradiated food and TV. But all technology really means, in the McLuhan sense, is the extensions of man. The extensions of man. And so language is a technology. Shamanism is a technology. Psilocybin is a technology. And certainly the internet is a technology. It's slowly, I think, dawning on a number of people that if we're talking about hallucinogens as consciousness expanding drugs, then the only difference between a drug and a computer is that one is slightly too large to swallow. And our best people are working on that problem, even as we speak. The drugs of the future will be much more like computers. The computers of the future will be much more like drugs. And I think what we have to recognize is that we are in a very brief and low energy technical phase in technology. Basically, we're at the tail end of the petrochemical steam era. And where we are headed is toward the solid state, fiber optic, global community of the internet. And when I was in San Francisco 2 weeks ago, the buzz was all about VRML, the virtual language markup, the virtual reality markup language whose protocols are being set now so that we will be able to build websites on the net that you can put on your helmet and walk around in. Sun Microsystems is about to introduce something called Hot Java, which will let you build and interact with your website without going through your server. Bandwidth is broadening as we speak. The whole world is being brought into the domain of electricity. And you may not know it, but Marshall McLuhan thought that this was the descent of the Holy Ghost. As a convert to Catholicism, he sort of went the opposite direction. As a convert to Catholicism, he decided that the descent of the third person of the Trinity and the worldwide spread of electricity were the same event. So I think that what we have to do is dematerialize culture in every way possible. And that means pharmacologize culture, computerize culture, network culture, virtualize culture, and make of it thereby a tool for the production of our poetic flights, a technology for the putting in place of our dreams as exhibits that we can show each other. This is what it is. This is what technology can be in the service of boundary dissolution. In the service of boundary maintenance, you get hydrogen bombs and serum. In the surface of boundary dissolution, you get psychoactive substances and the internet and sexual experimentalism, social justice, tolerance, and community. And the choice is to be made on an individual level by each and every one of us. I don't advocate a mass outbreak of psychedelic use. I think these things are a private matter. They are the only thing comparable to them in our human experience is our sexuality. And that's a private matter. How we define it, how we express it, how we act it out, who we do it with, what we think about it, and what we choose to say in public about it is all in our hands. I do not think that the government, under the guise of some phony, alarmist, pseudoscientific rhetoric, should attempt to control the evolution of consciousness. After all, if these things truly are consciousness expanding, it doesn't take too much intelligence to realize that it is the absence of consciousness that is causing our flirtation with extinction and planetary disaster. If there is any way to raise consciousness, diet, drug, machine, sexual practice, mantra, yantra, whatever it is, we should be furiously exploring and applying it. Because if we should fumble the ball, if we should actually, where our ancestors over thousands of generations did not fail, if we are to fail, the magnitude of the tragedy will be immense, because failure is not inevitable. It is not inevitable that we should fail. There are ideas, personalities, technologies available right now which, if honestly explored and implemented, could rescue the human enterprise from the disgrace that hovers over us. We don't want this to end in a toxified garbage pit ruled by Nazis, which is, the way we may well be headed. The Gaian mind has always been there. Nature originally, through the plants and shamanism, provided the tools for us to access this incredible natural database. Through the vicissitudes of history, previous generations lost the key in Western society. Since the 1960s, the key has been refound. It's a matter of great social controversy. It's a matter of great risk to those who take it, how they will be viewed by their peers. But there is no longer, ignorance is no longer an excuse. Anthropology in the last 100 years has laid at our doorstep the tools necessary for an archaic reconstruction of society and human values within that society. It's inconceivable that Western industrial capitalism could run on another 500 or 1,000 years. It will not continue as it has. It will deteriorate under the pressure of resource scarcity. And what few democratic values we have obtained, what little space for reasoned discourse has been created, will be the first to be swept away. So it's very, very important that people take back their minds and that people analyze our dilemma in the context of the entire human story, from the descent onto the grassland to our potential destiny as citizens of the galaxy and the universe. We are at a critical turning point. And as I say, the tools, the data that holds the potential for our salvation is now known. It is available. It is among us. But it is misrepresented. It is slandered. It is litigated against. And it's up to each one of us to relate to this situation in a fashion that will allow us to answer the question that will surely be put to us at some point in the future, which is, what did you do to help save the world? Well, I'll knock off now. I'll sign books. We'll take like a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and do questions. Thank you very much for your attention. And that, in fact, what we are involved in here at the end of the 20th century is some kind of accelerated forward escape into transformation. And when I lecture that subject, I more or less imply that it's inevitable. In other words, it's not that we have to do X, Y, or Z, that it's on track. I think it is on track, but I also think there's a place for the kind of politics we discussed this evening, because as the world gets crazier and crazier, a lot of people are going to get very, very anxious. This thing in Oklahoma City is an example of people getting anxious. So what needs to be done is to spread the idea that anxiety is inappropriate. It's sort of like we who are psychedelic have to function as sitters for society, because society is going to thrash and resist and think it's dying and be deluded and regurgitate unconscious material and so forth and so on. And the goal and the role then for psychedelic people, I think, is to try and spread calm. I'm very convinced that things are going to get a lot nuttier than they are, and they're a lot nuttier now than they have been for a while. But it doesn't mean the bad people are winning or that we're going to fumble the ball or anything. The mushroom said to me once, it said, this is what it's like when a species departs for the stars. It's a birth thing. It's complicated. If you had never seen a human birth and you came around the corner of a building in your daily round and it was happening, it vibrates medical emergency. I mean, blood is being shed, tissues stretched. You really have to have your chops together to step back and say, how wonderful, new life coming into the world. Because, that's not the vibe of it. And I think that's the circumstance that we're in. This is the birth canal to a new order. And at the moment, it looks like suffocation, constriction, limitation, possible death. But we need to inform ourselves and get a big perspective. And there's no way to get a big perspective like education and psychedelic experiences. If we can see history for what it is, it's a 25,000-year, nearly instantaneous transition from one state of being to another. And yes, there are 1,500 generations of people who live in that paper-thin transition time. But when it's over, and we will leave history behind the way you dump a used placenta, I'm sure. Yeah.
Is there any reliable information on the relationship between psychedelics and early Christianity?
Reliable information on psychedelic use in early Christianity? The answer is no. I mean, there is a book by John Allegro called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. He was a very respected Dead Sea scholar till he wrote that book. And that basically finished his career as a classicist. He says some incredibly provocative things in that book. To judge whether he's right or wrong, you would have to be an Assyrian philologist, about which I know nothing. So to the layperson, it seemed to be quite an impressive book, but apparently to his specialist colleagues, it was sloppy thinking and a travesty and reason to deny tenure. St. Augustine was a Montanist before he was a Manichaean before he converted to Christianity. And he mentions that Manichaeans forbade the use of mushrooms, the eating of mushrooms. It doesn't say the use of mushrooms. But the ancient Middle East, we don't know very much about psychedelic sacramentalism. It may have been there, it may not have been there. Absence of reference is not proof of absence. because of cult secrecy and other factors like that. We do know that or we feel we're on firmer ground in saying that the Greek mystery religions emphatically probably were psychedelic, especially the Eleusinian mysteries, the mysteries which were practiced on the plain outside of Athens every year for over 2,000 years. And everybody who was anybody in the ancient world made the journey to Eleusis to celebrate the greater mysteries, which were celebrated in September. Interesting approach to psychedelics there. You could only legitimately participate in the mystery of Eleusis once in your life. So imagine if you had a single high-dose psychedelic experience under ideal conditions, in other words, in darkness, under the care of experts, and then the rest of your life you had to sort it all out based on what happened that one evening. It was extraordinarily powerful for the ancient world. Eventually it was destroyed. Alaric the Visigoth, who was a barbarian, but that didn't stop him from being a convert to Christianity. Alaric the Visigoth burned Eleusis on his way to North Africa to burn other things. Yeah.
I was wondering, Terrence, if you've had a chance to read The Emperor's New Mind by Roger Penrose. It's an argument against the idea of AI, artificial intelligence, and whether you were able to follow this argument, because I would take it that you probably opposed to this argument.
I haven't read the book.
All right, I think I'm going to play with the negative space a little bit more. So another take coming up. Take 3.
I heard you bring it up once.
The Turing test.
The Turing test for artificial intelligence, and he also brings in the incompleteness theorem.
Oh, Gödel's incommensurability thing. A little Gödel, please. In 2/4 time. Well, I don't have a particularly strong opinion one way or another on AI. I certainly think computers can be a lot more intelligent than they are before we settle the question of whether they can pass the Turing test. You all know the Turing test is this test. Alan Turing was a mathematician. He figured it out during World War II, and it's basically if you call X on a telephone and you can't tell whether X is a person or a machine, then X passes the Turing test. And every year they have Turing tests where judges converse by telephone with computers and people and try and decide which are the computers and which are the people. And it's still pretty easy because the people exhibit exasperation, incorrect information, misinterpret the question, and so forth and so on. There are some wild thinkers out there, far wilder than me. If you want to read a wild book, read Hans Moravec's book, Mind Children, The Future of Human and Artificial Intelligence. And there's a book. I'm having a memory lapse here. Help me out, Tipler. I said, help me out with a memory lapse. You don't have to read my mind, for God's sake. Yes, thank you, Creon. Tipler's book is the end of all speculation where artificial intelligence is concerned. I think machine-human interfacing is very important. I think that the debate about whether a computer can think like a human being is kind of not very interesting. Computers think like computers. Already vast amounts of what we call human society are entirely run by machines, including very important financial sectors, market decisions, resource extraction decisions, inventory resupply decisions that feed clear back from the warehouse to the mine. In other words, machines say how much tin should be extracted and at what rate, and therefore to a certain degree say who should come to work and who shouldn't on certain days. A lot of design work of circuitry, engineers will simply tell a computer what the circuit should do and leave the actual architecture of the circuitry to machine decision. This means, more and more parts of the human world are being given over to machines to design. But when you see how much of the world looks like the arrival concourse of an international airport, having computers design the world might not be a bad idea. Definitely computers figure in our future. I mean, I wasn't joking when I said drugs and computers are migrating toward each other. I can imagine a world, and this is not the ultimate world by any means, a world 5, 6, 7 years in the future where the equivalent of today's advanced Macintosh would be something you glue on your thumbnail and communicate with that way. And beyond that lie enormous computational and data accessing abilities that may be accessed through implants. We're going to have to decide, how much of the monkey we want to take with us into the future. We don't want to take the homicidal killer. We don't want to take the male dominator, but it would probably be a mistake to leave the body entirely behind. After all, the body gives us our orientation in the world and our sense of ourselves as somehow coextensive with animal life. But how much of what we call human is really human is going to be a major topic for discussion from here to the end of time. Yeah, in the back.
Two questions on ecstasy. Number one, what's your take on MDMA, and what's the optimum grams to take to achieve sexual ecstasy?
Sexual ecstasy on ecstasy? Oh, on mushrooms. Oh, I see. Well, first about MDMA. Well, there is no doubt that from here to the end of time, whether it be 18 years or 1,000 years away, science is going to produce more and more psychoactive drugs. There are psychoactive drugs on the shelf now, waiting for human testing and government approval around the world. We cannot explore the brain, we cannot explore neurochemistry without these drugs being a natural consequence of this program of research. MDMA is a cyclicized amphetamine like MDA, like mescaline, which is a naturally occurring compound of this type. In the hands of a skilled psychotherapist, MDMA leads to conflict resolution, relationship insights into relationships, this sort of thing. I'm not entirely convinced that it's the silver bullet for these conditions. Every drug that has made its way onto the alternative culture scene has first billed itself as a love drug. That's an unfailing market ploy to get a drug to the forefront of public attention. Cannabis was sold to us as a love drug, LSD, psilocybin, ibogaine, MDMA is no different. MDMA does promote a certain kind of empathy, not a whole lot of vigorous sexual activity. In terms of what dose of psilocybin leads you into a sexual rather than a visually acute or visionarily ecstatified situation, I would say for a 145-pound person, probably 2 to 3 grams is this agitated, sexually active, or if no sex is happening, maybe dancing and drumming. In other words, thoroughly aroused, busy, active dose. As the dose rises, activity slows, and finally you just want to sit down, and then finally you just want to lay down, and then you're into the other phase. Behind you, there was another question.
Yeah, I was going to say that John Lilly has an interesting kind of speculation about the future possibility of solid state energies and autobiography of scientists. But I was really curious if you have anything to say or know about the credibility of the author William Cooper, who wrote a book called Behold the Campus.
This is the flying saucer debunker. And isn't he the one who said that he was the CIA guy for a long time? Well, this is slightly off the track, or might seem to some people to be slightly off the track. I don't know William Cooper's book. I regard that whole flying saucer thing as a civil war in a leper colony. But I do think, having been, like probably most of you, very interested in flying saucers from the time I was a kid, and I grew up when it was all happening. A couple of years ago, I accepted an invitation for the first time to go to a flying saucer conference. If you've never been to one and you're interested in flying saucers, go. You will have more insights into the phenomenon in a conference like that than in 10 years of studying it, because what's perfectly clear is that these people are self-selected for gullibility. And it's not their fault. It's just that the ticket through the front door is, would you believe this? Would you believe this? I think probably what happened, historically speaking, is that, in 1947, when the first UFOs were seen, it was a weird world. The explosion of the atom bomb, the work toward the hydrogen bomb, people didn't know Einstein and Truman and all this. They didn't know what it really meant. If they thought that it is conceivable that the solar system is monitored, and it is conceivable that this is the switch which turns on the monitor and brings attention. I mean, they were in awe of the atom bomb, and they realized they were tampering with cosmic forces. And then, at this moment of cosmic awe and realization of tampering, they begin to get reports of spacecraft entering the skies of Earth and interacting with human beings. Well, what they did, the CIA had just been founded in '48 and so forth and so on. What they did is they put a lot of time and effort into infiltrating all these groups that claimed knowledge of what was going on. And as a survivor of the New Left, I can tell you, when the government gets interested in infiltrating, I mean, there 2 out of every 3 members of SDS was a government informant at the height of its membership. So I believe that what happened was these flying saucer groups were massively infiltrated by the government in the course of its pursuing its constitutional obligation to maintain the public welfare. And by 54 or 55, the government was perfectly convinced that whatever flying saucers were, they did not pose a threat to the integrity of the air defenses of North America. And that was their real concern. But bureaucracies are weird creatures. They really exist only to perpetuate themselves. So at some point inside these agencies, they must have had to face the fact that they had massively infiltrated a bunch of very flaky people, and now their choice was to either end the program, tell the budget people that no, they wouldn't be needing that $10 million this year, or keep going with it because they now had a group of people self-selected for gullibility. And that group of people became the victims of every chemical experiment, weird technology, propaganda experiment, and so forth and so on, because their friends and relatives had already written them off as completely untrustworthy. Who would believe them no matter what story they told? So I really felt I was among severely damaged people, and it wasn't their fault. It's that they had become part of something that had become part of something that had become part of something, and they never really had a fighting chance. Do strange lights haunt the skies of Earth? You bet their booties they do. But the flying saucer cults are a social phenomenon and largely unrelated to whatever this anomaly is. Yeah.
Dr. Fuller, topics of the generalization of technology. Do you think we'll come a time when we are indistinguishable from technology, and would that be sort of a hypothesis that you speak about in your books?
No, I think it would go the other way, that we're moving toward a time when our technology is indistinguishable from us. In other words, I don't want us to all turn into 7100 80 AV. That doesn't seem like a good idea. But on the other hand, I could imagine as a hopeful scenario a future world of, let's say, 500 or 1 billion healthy, happy, well-fed people of all races, political persuasions, gender preferences, and so forth and so on. And those people would essentially live as our archaic ancestors did, very little material culture, very nomadic. But if you could transport yourself into the body of one of these people, you would discover that when they close their eyes, there are menus hanging in space. In other words, the computer that was on the back of the thumbnail, 5 years later, that computer moves into being kind of an implant, a black contact lens that is sewn into your eyelids at age 6, so that when you close your eyes, you're actually looking at an interface. And the entire database of the culture could be placed there. You see, really what computers are doing is they're making what we call the collective unconscious conscious. All data, all images are potentially accessible through the network. And, I'm still getting used to the idea of the network myself. Like, I keep thinking, oh, I have this timeline. I could get somebody's chronology and put it at my website. And then I remember, no, all I have to do is point to their website. I don't have to copy or move anything. If there is one list, that's all the world needs. Anybody else who needs that list can point to it from their website. So the speed at which new structures can be created is astonishing. I mean, it almost literally overnight you can build a website and begin to point at other websites and bring resources into yours. This is a technology which is going to turn out to not be what people think it is. It's going to be a technology for showing each other the inside of our heads, for showing each other our dreams. One thing I didn't talk about in the main part of the lecture is that psychedelics are catalysts for language. They speed up and catalyze the language formation process. And a culture cannot evolve any faster than its language evolves. And it cannot be any more glued together than the bandwidth that its languages will tolerate. And so what this technology that is putting in place is going to mean is the way in which it will dissolve boundaries is by making us transparent to each other. I mean, I can imagine a child of the future. We all bring home our drawings to stick on refrigerators and things like that. In the future, we won't stick them on refrigerators. We will stick them in our website. And everything will go into our website. And by the time we're 25 or something, our website will be the size of the American Museum of Natural History. And you can wander through it. And as a gesture of intimacy, you can invite someone else to wander through it. Well, that's who you are. It's your imagination. And I think, in a sense, I've said at times that the cultural enterprise is an effort to turn ourselves inside out. We want to put the body into the imagination, and we want the imagination to replace the laws of physics. With these technologies, we can probably do that, but it'll have to run on psychedelic design principles, or it's certain to be a mess. Yeah.
What could you tell us about the problems that some people are experiencing with the digestibility of the mushrooms and how it can lead to pain and some discomfort, and sometimes to like a nightmarish type experience?
Well, first of all, let me say this. There are several mushrooms which contain psilocybin which grow in cow dung. What I urge people to do, if you're serious about this, is to grow your own. This is moderately self-serving because I wrote a book about how to grow your own mushrooms. But there are many such books. You don't have to buy mine. You only need it if you want the best one. But you see here, Stamitz's book is excellent. And if you want to go large scale, Stamitz's book is the one. But let me say something then. After the brain, the stomach is the most heavily innervated organ in the body. And anxiety has a way of cropping up as a stomachache. So it's a lot of people have anxiety in the first hour of taking mushrooms, and they believe that something in the mushroom is giving them gastric distress. It really isn't. It's more like a case of butterflies on an empty stomach, because you should take mushrooms on an empty stomach. You can try a suppository, you can try another drug if you want, but there is in this psychedelic business something to be said for simply disciplining your hind brain. Also, you can suppress nausea with cannabis. So, a mixture of self-discipline, pharmacological steering, so forth and so on. If you have a severe reaction to the mushroom, you probably shouldn't take it. I mean, after all, it is a fungus, and as mammals, we have developed some pretty strong allergenic reactions to fungi, some of us. And certain reactions to psilocybin are not psychedelic reactions, like enormous sweating or something like that. That's more an indication of an allergy. If you're going to get into psychedelics, one of the things you have to do is learn your way around. Psychedelic sophistication doesn't mean you took everything there is in combination with everything else there is at high doses with your friends at rock concerts. It means that you figured out what worked for you and then really put the pedal to the metal, Yeah.
I recently came across David Tenson's work on totally rearranged monatomic elements, and found that these monatomic heavy metals act as superconductors, conduct light force through our nervous system. Are you familiar with this work at all?
No, you've stumped the star. I'm interested in organic superconductivity and room temperature superconductivity, but I don't know his work, so I can't comment on it.
He said he's going to be coming out with a book in 69 months called Ormus, O-R-M-E-S, Ormus, which is orderly rearranged monatomic elements.
I'm sure it will find its way to my head. Now all these hands. Oh, he should be the guy you tell me. All right.
How much of our consensus reality do you think is based on inexorable physical laws, things that aren't of our own creation, and how much, if any, is subject to change without notice, simply based on a consensus belief of what should be or what is going to be?
Well, this is sort of where I'm at. As you were asking the question, my tendency would be to say none, that none of our reality is based on inexorable physical law. But I only want that to be true. I'm not sure it is true. Whitehead he had this thing about what he called stubborn facts. And he said there are some stubborn facts, and you can cut your philosophy any way you want, but if you don't take account of the stubborn facts, you'll have a problem. A lot of reality is made of language. How much, I'm not sure, but my hope is that a great deal is made of language. Rupert Sheldrake, who's a good friend of mine, and we sort of think along the same lines, he believes that there are not inexorable physical laws, that there are just very old habits. He would think of the speed of light as a very old habit. These physical constants may be changing. We don't know. Take the speed of light. We've measured it on one planet since 1906 and cheerfully extrapolate it to every corner of the known universe with no sense that there might be a problem there at all. Yet, if you're a critic of this, you can look at the speed of light as measured from 1906 and you will notice that the values have been slowly going up. It's apparently going slightly faster than it was a century ago. Well, people just dump on that and say, no, you're a moron, you don't understand. It's that the instrumentality has become more precise, and so the measurement may have changed slightly. Oh yeah? Well, it seems to me in that case the points should cluster. How come the more recent ones are faster than the earlier ones consistently? In other words, it's not that we're getting measurements which cluster around a value, it's that we're getting measurements which are going out this way, toward faster. I think language is the key to making reality. I think our language is a very weak language. Computer languages may be more powerful, VRML or mathematics. But I believe the world is made of language. That's the magical belief. But then the challenge to that belief is, okay, wise guy, so how come the world isn't the way you say it is? Well, that's ungenerous. I think because it doesn't work quite like that. Consensus is set by societies, by millions of people. Reality is a phenomenon of many linguistically operating subsystems. Maybe if you and I were stranded on a desert island, we could get a reality going.
All right, well that gets the general forms hacked into place. I'd like to render them up more, clean up the lines, give it a little more dimension.
Over here.
Mushrooms. And secondly, is there any written documentation of this mushroom apparatus?
The documentation, well, there wouldn't be anything written, of course, it's earlier than that, but the documentation, it is well known that the Sahara was wetter in the past. Even as recently as Roman times, Pliny called it the breadbasket of Rome. And we know that human populations were out there. In the Tassili Plateau of southern Algeria, there are rock paintings.
And the title, I think, is going to be Blind
that
Projections.
show shamans with mushrooms.
But that's it for the
sprouting
moment.
out of
Thank you
their
for watching. That's
bodies
Adam Sturch broadcasting
and
from the
in
Mushroom
their
Mansion,
hands.
Taos, New Mexico.
So we have
Working on oil
mushroom
painting
use,
now
we have
titled
evidence
Blind
of mushroom
Projections.
use
Have a
at
good night,
the
Earth.
era of the Great